Loki's bounty of 2.6 billion berry is said to be a special bounty, but it is actually really hard to determine what the meaning behind the word special is here. We've now seen literally hundreds of bounties in the story, yet none of them have ever been shown with this label. In fact, every bounty we've seen that has been issued by the Marines has been the very definition of not special, where everyone gets the label, dead or alive. In all of One Piece, the only exception to this is Sanji, who for a brief period during Zou and Whole Cake Island had an only alive bounty. Yet even this bounty was not called special. So, what exactly makes Loki different? It could actually have something to do with Loki's current predicament of being imprisoned in Elbaf, and it is also possible that not only Loki, but Monkey D. Dragon is also one of the rare characters with this kind of special bounty. I already mentioned the idea of Loki not having an only alive bounty, but would it actually be possible that he instead has an only dead bounty, which we've so far never seen in the story? Only dead bounties could actually make a lot of sense in One Piece, due to the nature of how the bounty system works, where it is genuinely rigged. Even though the bounties normally say dead or alive before the price, this is actually false advertisement. This was explained by Igaram during Whiskey Peak, where if you bring in a bounty who is actually dead, the Marines only pay you 50% of the price. This is because the world government wants to kill criminals by themselves, by holding public executions. There could however also be a more sinister reason for them wanting criminals brought in alive, where the government has a history of experimenting on their prisoners, and even turning some into slaves for the celestial dragons. If Loki is someone whom the government wants dead by any means necessary, an only dead bounty could make a lot of sense, as the bounty hunter would be paid the full 100% of the bounty for killing Loki, and there would also be no risk of Loki escaping if a bounty hunter were to bring him in alive. Therefore, the chances of Loki actually being eliminated would be much higher than with a dead or alive bounty. However, I do have an issue with this idea. If Loki potentially has an only dead bounty, at this point in the story, I truly do not see why he of all characters would be the one the government wants dead at all cost. For example, Luffy is also a massive threat to the world government, and is the user of the abominable Nika fruit, and the government has literally tried to assassinate him in the past. What could possibly make Loki so special to warrant an only dead bounty, when we've seen so many other extremely dangerous criminals not get this treatment? What would make this even more confusing is that Loki's bounty is still only 2.6 billion berry. If he really was this high priority individual who gets an only dead bounty, it would surely also make sense for the government to put a much higher price on his head, if they want him dead so badly. While it is still possible that Loki has an only dead bounty, I feel like it would bring up so many questions that other possibilities should also be considered. One idea I've heard floated around is that Loki's bounty is special because he's actually not a pirate. This is probably not the case though, because we've seen several bounties on characters who weren't pirates, yet their bounties were also not called special. This goes all the way back to chapter 1, where the first bounty we ever see in the story is not a pirate bounty, but the bounty of the mountain bandit Higuma. By the way, it is pretty rich that the Marines went through the trouble of giving Higuma his measly 8 million berry bounty, but it took them only after Enies Lobby to finally give most of the Straw Hat crew bounties. Another idea I've heard is that Loki's bounty is special because he's a member of royalty, but this does not hold water either. There are several royals in One Piece, with normal bounties like Kuma, Cavendish, Sanji, and so many others. Perhaps you could say that the world government does not view these characters as legitimate members of royalty, but by that logic, then neither should Loki be a legitimate royal in their eyes. Elbaf is unaffiliated with the world government, and they should consider Elbaf to be just as much of a rogue state as, for example, Germa. Because Sanji still has a normal bounty despite his Windsmoke blood, however, there is not much basis for Loki being treated differently because of him also being royalty. Even characters like Doflamingo and Bonnie do not have special bounties, and they are not just royal blood, but are in fact descendants of the celestial dragons. Perhaps we are thinking about this topic backwards. Instead of focusing on what makes Loki's character unique and special, it's more logical to start by trying to figure out what exactly would be the practical purpose behind having a special bounty. Bounties are ultimately just a reward system for bringing in dead or captured criminals to the Marines. Maybe a better way to look at this topic is with a question like this. If someone were to kill or capture Loki and bring him to the Marines, what would be done differently here than with any other bounty in the series? Personally, I think the clue could be in Loki's current situation, because that's the one thing that makes him unique compared to every other character in the story. Loki is at the moment imprisoned in the middle of Elbaf. This is actually really important from the perspective of bounty hunting. Any would-be bounty hunters would have a hard time getting to Loki, as they would have to trespass on the giant's territory if they wanted to collect his bounty. If you were a bounty hunter in the One Piece world, you could logically think that Loki is not worth the trouble. For example, if you instead decided to target someone like Trafalgar Law, you would earn around the same amount of money, without having to go through the trouble of invading the strongest nation in the world. Realizing this, the world government could make Loki a special case, where they would actually allow other criminals to collect Loki's bounty. The way bounties work is that only law-abiding citizens are able to collect them. This is for example seen in the Ace novel, where the Whitebeard pirates capture a fellow pirate, but to collect his bounty, they themselves cannot deliver him to the Marines, but have to instead use an intermediary. As mentioned before in this video, in the eyes of the world government, Elbaf is basically a rogue state, and every giant in Elbaf could be considered a criminal. And it could be that the giants are normally unable to do things like collect bounties. What the world government could do with Loki is remove this rule, and allow essentially anyone to bring Loki over to them. The main aim here would naturally be for the giants themselves to hand over Loki. It is also possible that there is something more special about Loki's bounty that the government could use to manipulate the giants into giving him over, which could be something to do with the reward itself. If someone brought Loki over to the Marines, they could give them something extra on top of the money. This could be something specifically designed to motivate the giants to give Loki up, such as some item or artifact that is important to Elbaf, but is currently in the government's possession. We've actually had a few examples of these kinds of items in the story. Shushui, the sword that used to belong to sword god Ryuma, was a sacred treasure of Wano that Moria stole from them in the past. This theft was considered a national tragedy, and when Zoro later appeared carrying Shushui, essentially every Wano character wanted him to return the sword to Ryuma's grave. Another example would be something like Ace's devil fruit, the Mera Mera no Mi. After Ace died, neither Luffy or Sabo wanted the fruit to fall into the wrong hands. The idea of devil fruits being mementos of their past users is apparently pretty universal, where even someone like Bartolomeo only came to Dressrosa so that he could later give Ace's fruit to Luffy. The theory here is that Loki's bounty is special, because it offers a similar extra reward like this in addition to the money. Some devil fruit or another item that is dear to Elbaf, which would make the giants consider essentially extraditing Loki to the government. If special bounties actually work like this, where they would do things like give criminals the chance to bring in bounties, or promise special rewards in addition to money, which other characters in the story could have these kinds of special bounties? One interesting possibility is actually Monkey D. Dragon. Compared to most of the other powerful characters in the story, Dragon is actually incredibly elusive. On paper, collecting someone like Kaido or Big Mom's bounty would actually be very straightforward, where you would only need to go to their home island and beat them in a fight. With Dragon, this would not be so easy. Dragon is someone who basically lives in the shadows, and is seemingly often moving around the world. He is also elusive to a point where many of Dragon's subordinates did not even believe that he was a real person, before his identity was revealed to everyone after the Summit War. Because of how hard Dragon is to track down, the government could have given him a special bounty, where criminals could collect it, in an attempt to make the other revolutionaries target Dragon. While this would clearly be very desperate, as Dragon's men are seemingly very loyal to him, it could be that the government simply has no other choice here, where tracking down Dragon is simply too difficult for normal bounty hunters. Another character could have this kind of special bounty is actually a character who apparently died years before the story, Rox D. Sebek. The reason why the government could have allowed other criminals to collect this particular bounty could be because of the nature of the Rox pirates. From everything we've heard about them, the Rox pirates were a very tumultuous crew, with not much loyalty to their captain. Sengoku describes the crew as getting along terribly with each other, and both Whitebeard and Big Mom have scenes where they talk about not trusting Sebek himself. It could be that the government saw an opportunity here, and allowed criminals to collect Sebek's bounty, as he was far more likely to be betrayed by his own crew than other pirate captains. Let's say that the idea of this video is true, and that Loki's bounty is special because it's meant to motivate the giants to give one of their own over to the government. Why would the world government go through all this trouble for Loki? It's not like Loki is the first character in the story who is in a country unaffiliated with the world government. For example, Totland is also another country in the One Piece world that is basically a rogue state made up of criminals. Yet none of the characters from Totland had special bounties like Loki. The reason why the government could be putting more effort into Loki is that Loki could in fact be one of the worst criminals in history, where him being brought to justice would be an almost symbolic victory. If you are interested, you should click here to watch my video on why, before Shanks, Loki might have literally been an emperor of the sea. As always, thanks a lot for watching this video to the end.